Alright everyone, I want to do some practice tonight. I actually already finished this, but it took me so long to figure out some of the basic things that I decided I might as well just make this a journal entry. So this is another Python video. My idea was I just want to do something simple like take Celsius, and convert it into Fahrenheit. And what I want is kind of a list of values where, like, if we had 0 degrees Celsius, then where it's paired with 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and if it was 14 degrees Celsius, then it would be paired with 57.2 Fahrenheit, and 15 would be with 59, that kind of thing. So something like that where that's the output of what I'm doing. And it's actually a pretty easy script to write, pretty short. So let's go over what we're doing here. So Celsius, first of all, we want to define what Celsius is. So Celsius is this empty box. We're leaving it as an empty box because we're going to automate the process of what goes in this box. You could manually say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that would be fine too. But because we want to be as efficient and useful with the program as possible, we're going to leave the box empty and we're going to fill it in with a script. So for I in range, this is how we fill this in. And we're going to go from 0 to 100. This means that all the way from literally 0 to 100, we want all of these to be numbers to be represented. Oops. And here's what we want to happen. Celsius.append. And what do we want to append? We want to append I. So in other words, the I value is going to go into this box. That's literally the same as just doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But the advantage is that with these two lines of code, we can do 0 to 100, 0 to 1,000. It saves a lot of time, in other words. From 0 to 100, we want that value to be plugged into here. Alright, that's how we get our Celsius values. So obviously we're going to go from the number 0 to 100 with that. And you can also skip too. There's an extra part, the step function, which means maybe we want, this would be every even number. This would be every third number. Every sixth, Celsius. We can divide it how we want, but we'll look into that a little bit more later. Alright, so for the next part we want to define what Fahrenheit is. So Fahrenheit. I always feel like I don't know how to spell these words. So we have Fahrenheit, and the rule for Fahrenheit is pretty simple. So here's the math behind it. I times 9/5. So the reason why we're doing this is because we still want this I in the picture. We still want this I to be here, the Celsius number. In other words, for each number in Celsius, that number will go through this formula. So that's why we're putting the I back in here, is that this is a constant thing for all the values. And then we want to add 32. So in other words, if just like with normal, if we had 0 Celsius, then 0 times 9/5 is 0, and then we add 32, which equals 32, right? So that's essentially what we're doing. For each of these values in here, we put it through this formula, which is the conversion formula. Alright, then for I in Celsius. So now we're explicitly telling the computer that this I is the same I, like I just mentioned to you. This I is the same I as the one up here. Alright, and so far we have two sets of variables, but how do we mix them together the way that would make sense for our eyes? How do we make it visually appealing? Well, we do that with this. Comb. We can do any other variable. I call it comb as in combined. And so we want to zip together Celsius, so Celsius, and Fahrenheit. Now this is a little bit disadvantaged to some extent, because now this makes it a tuple, and tuples are harder to work with for our purposes here. So we're going to have to kind of undo this step. So I guess I'm getting ahead. What zip does is it takes for each value in one column. So if we had this set was 1, 2, well let's just do what we're doing here. 1, 2, 3, oh, I skipped 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Alright, so that was our values in Celsius. Let's put plenty of space here. Well, then what's going to happen in Fahrenheit is that we have 32, 33.8, I'm just going to round here, 34, I'm just going to round just to make it simple, 36, 37, again this is rounding so it's going to look a little wonky, 39, oh, and 41 exactly. Alright, so what we're doing is you're marrying these two sets together. Each element here in their proper order gets married to these elements in their proper order. So 0 will match with 32, 1 will match with 34, 2 will match with 36, 3 will match with 37, 4 will match with 39, 5 will be with 41. This is the exact pairing that we want. So the advantage here is that this will pair them in the exact way that we want. Each Celsius gets its own Fahrenheit value and only its Fahrenheit value. In mathematics, we call that a bijection. However, though, like I said, this is problematic because now we have something called a tuple, and what we really want is a list. So everything here is in list form, which is what we want. This helps us out, but then it puts it into tuple form. A tuple is basically kind of like a list, except has some basis vectors like 6, 2. So in our own case, it would be like 0, 32, 0. That would be kind of what we'd get out the output. And so because it's a set of vectors, you could say, within a list, then that's what makes it a tuple. However, a list would just look like this. And these two values would be completely separate without any relation to each other. But before this is a tuple because these values are related to each other. 0 corresponds to 32, and they all exist, all these sets exist within a larger list itself. So the answer to this is very simple. I did a lot of that talking, but all these lines of code are actually very simple. So list, I should do something like this. List 1 equals list home. And that was pretty simple. We zipped it here, making it a tuple. Now we turn it back into a list. So we keep all of the advantage of this, and we still keep our list. And now the last part is pretty simple, just 2 more lines left. So now that we've combined everything together and remade them back into a list, now we want to see our work. Well, how do we see our work? We do this. For k in range, so we're going to do a different variable here. 0, and we can do 0 to 100, so that means for all the values from 0 to 100 in both Celsius and, well, all the values in Celsius from 0 to 100 and their corresponding conversions in Fahrenheit will be listed together. And of course we have to do the colon there. And then we want it to print. We wanted to print list 1, but, well, what we could do, originally what we could do is this. We could do print, let me just back up here, list 1. If we did that, then everything gets printed together, but it'll come up into kind of like a all-in-one-go kind of thing. So it's not as visually appealing. You could end it here, and that's fine. Or you can do 4k and range 0 to 100. Print list 1. And then we do the bracket k. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10. And what we get is this array of numbers exactly like we want them to. Now, what we also could do is we can just put a comma here, and like I said earlier, we can skip, or this is called a step function. We can step, as in we can take any, like we can take all the even numbers, we can take every number, which is no different than just writing this. We can take every 10 numbers, we can take every 5 numbers, you know, divide it by however we want to, and all those numbers that fit within this range, solid integers, will just be listed. So if we wanted to, you know, most likely, for most purposes, you probably want like 10 or 5, or maybe 2 or 3.